Alrighty, so today I'm going to show you how to put a binding on a quilt. Okay, I'm using a small little project here, just a little pot holder. Now, you can do this technique with any quilt that you're doing, any size quilt, it doesn't matter. It just depends on how big you want your binding. Now for this particular one, I'm actually using 2 1/4. So for my standard quilts, I actually use a 2 1/2 inch strip, but this one I'm doing, because it's a smaller one, I'm actually doing 2 1/4. Now off camera, I've actually pressed these with the wrong sides touching, so this is what it looks like. So I've got a nice folded edge there and a raw edge here. So now what I'm going to do is show you how to attach it to your quilt or your little mini quilt or whatever you're working on. Alrighty, so I just find a side. I generally start on the longest side and I lay it flat along there, and then I pop a pin, and in this case I probably come down about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches, and that's where I'm going to start my stitching. Okay, so as I said, we pop this onto one side and we put a pin about 2 inches down, and that's where we're going to start our stitching from. So just getting it underneath the needle on your sewing machine, just line that up. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate, that is fine. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to start stitching using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to come down, and you can see here this is where the little quilt is ending. So basically what I'm going to do is stop about 1/4 inch. So that is possibly just about there. Okay, so I'm going to stitch down, and when I get towards that pin, I'm actually going to stop and turn the quilt. Just remember to do a little bit of a reverse as well when you start. Just 1 or 2 stitches, and then we'll stitch down to that pin and we'll just stop there. With the needle in the down position, we'll just remove that pin, lifting our presser foot up, and we're just going to turn it so the point, and I'll just show you here, you can just see there, that's the point of the quilt, just in there. Okay, and then we're going to stitch, and it gives us a 45-degree angle. We're just going to stitch straight off. Don't have to reverse or anything like that. Lift the needle up, take the quilt out of the machine, and you can see there that we've just got that 45-degree angle. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my little quilt so that angle is facing away from me, and I've got my binding still just continuing on. So what this 45-degree angle does is help me make my mitered corner. So then I just flip it up like so. Okay, so now the fabric is heading away from me, and then I fold it onto itself, and now I'm coming down the next side of the quilt. So you can see there's my mitered corner, and then I just place that underneath the needle again. I put my presser foot down, and then I just start stitching. I do a little bit of a back stitch, and with my needle in the down position, I just continue sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down until I get towards the next corner, and again I stop 1/4 inch away from that ending just there. So again I just grab my pin and I just I just eyeball it, and I just place that pin in there, and I just continue down to that pin. Needle in the down position, I remove the pin, lift the presser foot, turn it so I've got the 45-degree, and then I just come off that. Needle up, presser foot up, remove the mini quilt from the machine, and again my fabric is continuing on. I've got my 45-degree. Again I lift that up like so. So you can see there's that nice 45-degree angle, and then I fold it on top of it again, and then I pop it back under the presser foot down, needle down, and I continue on. Remembering just to do a little back stitch. 1 or 2 stitches is okay. That was probably a little bit too much. And again, I start heading down. You can see I'm coming to the end. This time I'm not going to put a pin in. I have marks on my presser foot that tell me when I've hit the 1/4 inch mark. So there's a line there. The edge of the quilt is lining up with that line on my presser foot, and most presser feet do actually have it, so just have a look at yours. And then we just lift that presser foot up, make our 45, take it out, and repeat what we've done with the last corners. Again, up and down, so you can see that. I'll show you again. So up, so it's going away from you, and then I usually just put my finger on the edge of the quilt and bring it back down, and that's it. Again, and we keep going down. So now we're coming up to our final corner. And we repeat the same thing. Stop 1/4 inch out, lift the presser foot, turn it to the 45, sew off the edge, take the quilt out. Again, fabric's going this way, lifting it up so it's away from you, and then folding it down on itself. Okay, so you can see here that my edges, my folded edges is matching up here. Okay, you don't want to have it so you've got this bit poking out and it's looking like that. Okay, you want these to be aligned. So you can see there that that is aligning up nicely. So we're aligning on this top edge here and this edge here, and these 2 edges are aligning as well. Okay. Again, pop that back into the machine. But this time we're going to do our little back stitch. And with the needle in the down position, you're going to come down, but you're going to stop about there, about 1.5 inches down to 2 inches. Okay, and we're going to stop there because we need to join our binding. So you can see here they're not joined. Okay, so we've got 2 tails. So now what we're going to do is join those. So just do a little back stitch there. Lift the needle up and take the quilt out of the machine, and I'll show you what we do next. Okay, so we've put this binding on now, and we've got all this excess, and we've got, this is where we started, so we now need to join this end to this end. So basically, and get rid of all this excess binding. Okay, so basically what I do is I just move that to the side for now. Okay, and then I just, laying it nice and flat, I just pop a pin into the beginning of the where I started the binding, and that's just going to hold it in place for me, and it makes it super easy to do that. Then I'm going to get the excess bits and I'm going to lay that on top. So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pop a pin in here. So I want to lay this flat, but I don't want to stretch it. Okay, so I'm going to lay that flat, and I'm just going to pop a pin in there, and I know that that's not going to move on me. And the same with this end, just going to lay it nice and flat, grab that pin, and pop that in there. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my ruler and my marking pen, which happens to be a friction pen. Okay, or you can use chalk or a pencil, whatever, it doesn't matter, because we're actually going to cut on this line so it won't be visible. So basically what I want to do now is I actually want to take the ruler and line it up with that bottom tail at about 2 1/8. Okay, so there's the 2 inch and 1/8. So you can see there that bottom tail is lining up with that, making sure it's all flat. Then I'm going to make a line just on the other side of that white line. Okay, and that means that is where I'm going to cut, and you only do the top one. So now I can take these 2 pins out that were holding the top one, lift it up out of the way, and just snip that excess fabric off. Okay, I can now remove that pin there, and this gives me enough room to play with everything. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to join the 2 pieces together. So basically what you do is the one to the left, you want to open that up with the right sides facing up, and the one to the right, you want to open that up with the right sides facing together. And then what you're going to do is you're going to grab a pin, and you are going to pop a pin in there, making sure that it's laying flat, and you can curl up the little quilt if you have to make it easier for yourself. So you can see there I've just almost got it folded in half. Okay, you're going to open that up, and then what you're going to do is you're going to pop another pin, and you can see there I practiced a little bit off camera to make sure that I had it in the right spot. I didn't, so I can just play around with it. So you can see there they're right sides together, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line from corner to corner on the 45. So just basically grabbing your ruler, and you should be able to, you can't see it on camera, but you should be able to see the corner of the bottom one anyway. And then all I do is I place my ruler corner to corner, and then I just draw a line, and it can be a dotted line, a solid line, whatever you want, and that just makes it nice and easy for you to stitch on that line. So I'm going to head over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to start here doing a back stitch, and then I'm going to stitch all the way along and doing a back stitch at the end. Okay, so you can see there I've stitched along, and what I like to do now is just before I cut that off, I want to make sure that it is going the right way. I can see that there's no twists or anything like that in there, so I can now cut this excess bit off. About 1/4 of an inch away from your sewn line. And there we go. I usually just finger press this. Get rid of my excess threads. And then that will lay nice and flat. Give it a press if you have to. And then I'm just going to align my raw edges up with the raw edge of the little quilt, or in this case pot holder. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back over to the sewing machine, and where I finished off I'm actually going to start there doing a back stitch, come all the way down, and where I started stitching is where I will finish off and do a couple of back stitches. Alrighty, so that's it. Our binding is now on the front, and basically what we're going to do now is we're actually going to roll this over, and we're going to attach it to the back. Now I like to do my bindings by hand, so this is what this tutorial is about, is doing it by hand and how to attach the binding on. So all I do for this is I just flip it over. I grab my Wonder Clips and I just clip it around. So when I come to a corner, and I'm not sure whether you're going to be able to see this or not, but we'll give it a go. So when you come to a corner, so I've clipped it all along, okay, and I've come to a corner, so I lay it flat, and then I spin the quilt, and I bring my corner down. And you can see there that I've got a nice mitered corner, okay. Might be easier to see if I put a pin in. So just So you can see there that we've got a nice mitered corner, and mitered corner on the front and mitered corner on the back. And then I just continue doing that all the way around. Just makes it easier when I go to hand sew it. It's already folded over. You can give it a bit of a press if you want to, that's fine. I've done a smaller binding on this because it's a smaller project, and it's just a pot holder. Again, we've come up to this corner, so I've spun it, and then I'm just bringing that over. And it'll just naturally try to, as long as you've got a nice, like if you can't get this to go up, just get your pin and just pop that in like so. Let's see that. Okay, so sometimes, like, see, if I try to do it, it just doesn't want to fold over, so I can just get a pin and I put that into the corner, and not going past the edge of the quilt. So you can see there's the edge of the quilt there. So just getting my fabric to lay nice and flat, and then bringing that top fabric over, and that just gives us a nice corner. Pop a pin in there. Now you do want to avoid pulling it, because it'll bring your corner around from the front, and you don't want to do that. So you just keep going all the way around, and that's all you do on those corners. I'll show you when I get to the next corner. Okay, again, if you've got excess threads in there, get rid of them. This is the time to get rid of them. Okay, grab a pin. So roll your binding over. In most cases you can just fold it over with your fingers, but you see how it's just not aligning for me there? That's where I find the pin comes in handy, because you can just fold it over and you can see there it's going to align just nicely. Sometimes it can be a bit fiddly. There you go, you can see there that it's just aligned just nicely. And again, just pop a pin in and that'll hold it in place. Okay, so we're coming down to our last corner. And again, I grab a pin and I just make that nice and tight up in there and bring that down. And then just pop a pin in, and there we go. You can see that's a nice mitered corner. So that's what we do there. So we've got that all in place. You might have to put a couple more clips in, or pins, or whatever that you're using. But now what we're going to do is we're actually going to start hand stitching that down. Okay, so we've got our needle and we've got our thread. I'm using dark thread so you can see what I'm doing with the binding. Okay, we've got it all, our mitered corners all done, and we've got it all clipped in place. So basically now all we need to do is hand sew that down. So I'm just going to show you how to do it on a couple of stitches, and then I'll show you it all finished. So I'm sure there are different ways for binding to be attached by hand. This is the way I have been taught how to do it. It's the way I do all my bindings. Love it or hate it, it's just the way I do it. And I really do try to get an invisible stitch happening. So basically what I do is I got my thread, and depending on the application, on what I'm doing, for this one I'm just going to use a single thread. For most of my quilts I'll use a double, and I use a 40 to 50 weight thread. So this one particular brand is a Gutermann thread. It's a navy blue. I would normally match my thread to my background. So if I was doing this for a customer, let's say a customer, or it was something that I didn't have to show on camera, I would actually have used a white thread. But today I'm going to use a dark thread so you can see what I'm doing. So basically all I do is just remove one of the clips, and then up in where the binding is, I go through the top layer and just the wadding, and I just pull that through, and what happens is when I bring the binding over, that will hide that knot. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to take a small little bite out of the edge, so where that crease is of the binding. So I will just get a little bit closer so you can see. Okay. So you can see there that I've just come up and down, and I'm just coming into that fabric, just in that groove there. So coming from underneath. Okay, and that's my first spot. Then I'm going to do them about a 1/4 inch apart. So this fabric is really easy for that because these squares are actually a 1/4 inch. So again, I just go up under, and I'm just going through that top layer and the wadding, and then I'm coming out into the binding, into that crease. And then I'm just going to get myself untangled from the pin, and then I'm just going to pull that down, and you can see that that's just securing it. So if I was using white, you would actually not be able to see that. Now the object of this is to actually get over the stitch line, to cover the stitch line from where we've sewn it on the front. And I just basically, where I came out, I go in again and then come out at the next point, and just taking that little bite of the binding, and then I just pull it down, and you can see essentially it is just disappearing. Okay, again, and you want to be careful that you don't go through to the other side. I have my finger under there and I can feel if the needle goes through there, so I'll be able to feel the needle. Okay, and again I just keep doing that. So you can see there that you can barely see that stitching. Okay, and that's what you're going for. So it's an invisible stitch, so some people call it a blind hem stitch, some people call it an invisible stitch, but that's what you want to do, and you do that all the way around. So you're going in where you come out, and then a 1/4 inch away you're coming out, and just taking a little snippet of that binding in the crease there. If you take a little, if you've not done a binding before and this is your first binding that you're ever doing, don't stress if you can see the threads. Just make sure you don't go through to the front side, and that you are actually catching your binding down as close as you can to that crease, and you're just giving it a little bit of a tug. See? And as you can see, I am using a dark thread, so you just take your time and it'll just disappear for you. Okay, so we're coming up to the mitered corner, and what I do is, again, I go in where I just came out, and then I just grab that mitered corner through the binding underneath. So you might have to move the pin out of the way. Okay, so I'm coming in there, and I'm coming out of the binding underneath in the crease, and then just catching that corner. You can see that? So I've gone through this side and this side, and then I just pull that down, and that holds it in place. I can get rid of my pin, and I can spin it now. And again, I just go in where I came out, just through the top layer and the wadding, and not all the way through, and just 1/4 inch away, come out of that little crease there in the binding, and pull that through, and that secures my mitered corner. Now this is just a pot holder. Some people like to stitch this closed. I generally don't worry about it. It's not for a show or anything like that, and that's a whole different video on show binding. But this is basically how I do my binding. So I just come in and I come out in the crease, and that gives me a nice invisible stitch. And you can see that you can't even see it, and I'm using dark blue thread. Okay, and you continue all the way around. Alrighty, so I've come back around to where I started, and I've got probably 1 or 2 stitches left to do. So again, I just go in and I come out 1/4 inch away, and I'll pop that down. So this is my last stitch. So I go in where I just came out, and I come out where I started. Again, in the edge of the binding, and that's just going to secure it. So now what I do is I go into the same spot, and I just come out, and I just do a little bit of a knot, and then I go up behind that stitch and secure and come out just beside it, and again that's done. And now where I've just done that stitch, now you normally wouldn't see this because I'd be using the correct thread, but I just go in to that knot through the center of it, and then I come out at the top of the binding, and I give that a bit of a tug, and you can see there that it's just disappeared. Okay, so I pull that fairly tight so it's like it's curling under. Then I just grab my snips and I lay them flat against the fabric, and I just snip that, and then I just give it a bit of a roll. Sorry about that, just bumped the camera. Give it a bit of a roll and it disappears. And so you can see there that you can't see any of the stitches. Okay, so I hope you like that little tutorial on how to put the binding on, and that helps you out with your quilts. As I said, it's the same technique for any size quilt. So it's something this small, a little coaster, or even a massive king size quilt. And you can see here, like I'll get rid of all my threads, but you can see there, even though I've used the dark blue thread, you can barely see those stitches. And on a bigger quilt, I probably wouldn't do them a 1/4 inch apart. I'd probably do them 3/4 of an inch. And you can see on the front that it's all secured nicely, and yeah, and that's how you put a binding on. Thank you very much for joining me today. I really hope you like this tutorial, and if you find it very helpful for your future projects. My name's Nicole Reid for Darvanalee Design Studio, and I'll see you all again next time. Bye for now.